The painful sale was the last episode of Rust Valley Restorers. Fans say goodbye to the famous king of junkyards. But then something unusual happened. There were always new episodes. Mike was still on TV, still mending vehicles, and still living his dream. How did a man who lost his empire manage to keep his show going? The answer shows a secret that most people who watched the show never knew about what truly transpired. On February 4, 1958, Mike Hall was born in St. Boniface, which is in Winnipeg, Manitoba. His father acquired a job with the Canadian Pacific Railway when he was still a little boy, thus the whole family moved to Kamloops, British Columbia, in the west. For Mike, that move changed everything. He had a lot of room to travel and explore back roads and wide fields in the interior of British Columbia. One item quickly took over his whole world. Vehicles. Not brand new ones, but ancient, rusty wrecks that have been left behind in fields and behind barns. By the early 1970s, when Mike was still a teenager, he was already going into people's backyards and seeking for dead automobiles on old rural roads that he could fix up. While most kids were saving up for bikes or records, Mike was bringing home junk that no one else wanted. He didn't see any rust. He saw a promise. A broken down 1950s coupe or a pickup truck that was falling apart wasn't trash to him. It was a riddle that needed to be solved. Some of his pals felt it was strange. People in the neighborhood looked at him funny, but he didn't care. He was already gathering cars and putting them away wherever he could. When most kids were still trying to figure out what they wanted to be, Mike already knew he wanted to mend things with wheels. Mike had collected dozens of old cars by the time he turned 20 in the late 1970s. He hadn't gone to school to learn a trade. There were no beautiful certificates on his wall. He had experience in the real world. He learned everything on his own. How to fix engines, how to shape metal, and how to bring an automobile back to life. He learned something from every wreck he brought home. It was a challenge to get every engine that wouldn't start to work. And over time, all that trial and error became skill. The kind of skill that wasn't learned in school. It came from getting hurt and spending long nights in frigid sheds. Mike Hall never thought he'd possess hundreds of vintage automobiles when he was a kid, but his love of rust and engines didn't spring out of nowhere. He was already scaling cliffs and blowing up mountainsides to make a career in the 1980s, long before the cameras came. That's where he really started his career. He created a business called Chimera Springs Rockworks. And it wasn't like other construction jobs. Mike wasn't laying bricks or pouring concrete. He was drilling into the sides of cliffs, dangling from ropes, and setting off controlled explosives. This labor was dangerous and tiring, and most people wouldn't undertake it. But Mike loved the rush of excitement. People started nicknamed him the Rasta Blasta during those years. Due of his long, dreadlocked hair and the fact that he worked in a dangerous job. The name stuck with him for the rest of his life. He persisted in that line of work through the 1980s, 1990s, and even into the 2000s. His blasting job made him famous in British Columbia, and he made a lot of money doing it. But he wasn't putting it away. He was using much of it to buy trash automobiles. And not just one or two at a time. He wanted old cars that no one else wanted. It didn't matter if they were rusty or lacking half of their parts. Mike wanted the car if he thought it had a soul or a narrative. And if it needed help, that just made him desire it more. He wasn't buying flashy old cars that had been fixed up. He was looking for old cars that someone had abandoned behind. Over the next few decades, cars from all over the world began to fill up his property. Some of these were hard-to-find muscle automobiles from the 1960s. Some were antique European sports cars that hadn't run in years or beat-up pickup trucks. He would use the money he made from blasting rock to buy another broken machine every time he did it. People started to wonder how many cars he really had by the time the 2010s came along. The figure was hard to believe. There were more than 400 cars parked on his grounds, and they weren't simply there to look at. As far as you could see, it was a panorama of rust and metal. He used to say he didn't collect vehicles as a joke. He gathered up rust. That's how the moniker Rust Brothers came about. The people who worked with him weren't merely mechanics or workers. They were on the same weird mission. Mike didn't want to make money by flipping cars or opening a showroom. He was trying to save machines that other people had left behind. It felt like a success to save them from the junkyard, even if they never got fixed. People who didn't know Mike well didn't always get it, but the way he talked about those automobiles made it evident that it wasn't just a hobby. It was more than that. He previously remarked that he couldn't leave a car that required help. He was pulled to them, and every explosion he set off during the day brought him one step closer to being able to afford another piece of history at night. Mike Hall never truly wanted to be famous. He was living a completely different existence in the shoe-swap area of British Columbia long before he ever appeared on TV. He had quietly moved to a farm there, where it was quiet and away from all the hubbub. He got married, but he never told anyone his wife's name. They had a kid named Connor Charman Hall in the 1980s and developed a family together. Mike had a small puppy named Minnie who instantly became a member of the family. Even though the property seemed calm, Mike was not. He was still obsessed with cars even though he has a wife and kid. It really did cause some problems at home. His wife told him that no more junk automobiles could be on their property. Their farm had 26 acres, and she didn't want it to become another graveyard full with rust. But Mike didn't say anything. He just went somewhere else to chase his ambition. He bought a second 5-acre tract in Tappan, a community not far from Shuswap Lake. Thus was close to the Trans-Canada Highway, and thus became famous. People would later call that site Mike's Field of Dreams. It was basically a sunburned patch of land with hundreds of ancient cars that were rusty and stretched as far as you could see. Some were from the 1940s, and some were from the 1970s. Some were entirely taken apart or buried in grass. But to Mike, each and every one of them still had life in them. He didn't see any rust. He saw possibilities. Mike's life was all over the place in the 2000s. He worked his main job throughout the day, which was blasting rocks for a highway construction crew. But at night, he changed. He would go to his junkyard and work alone like a crazy scientist, trying to bring old metal back to life. He didn't care if no one was looking. He wasn't doing it to get famous. He did it because he enjoyed it. But fate had other ideas. Something strange happened in 2016. Mike was in the mountains of British Columbia when a big rock slide blocked a road. They called Mike Hall because the cleanup crew needed aid right away. And when he got there with his gear and experience, something crazy happened. The Discovery Channel was making a documentary called Highway Through Hell, and they asked Mike to be in one of the episodes. That was the first time the world really saw him. Mike walked over to a pile of rocks and set his charges while wearing a hard hat and climbing cliffs like it was nothing. He employed his well-known Rasta Blasta, a powerful device that blows up rocks and clears the road. It was only a short scene, but it was enough. People stopped and looked because of how fearless he was, how ridiculous his hair was, and how wild his energy was. By the time Mike Hall was in his late 50s, his modest part of Tappan, British Columbia, had changed into something that most people couldn't believe unless they saw it for themselves. There were more than 500 rusty cars spread out over acres of land. Some were going down into the ground. Some were buried in weeds halfway. But Mike didn't notice any trash. He saw the past. He saw promise. He was familiar with every car. He could tell you the make, model, and year of a car just by looking at it. One piece even suggested he could explain the details of each of the 562 cars that were parked on his land. It wasn't a guess. He could recall where he acquired each one and what it meant to him. Some of them had been with him for more than 30 years. A few had been sitting there for almost 40 years. They weren't just vehicles. He lived for them. But it was getting to be too much. The dream that used to make him happy has slowly started to become a burden. It wasn't simply about having enough room to store more than 500 broken down cars. It cost money. It took time. It needed power. And it got people's attention. Sometimes the wrong kind. People next door were curious. People in charge began to ask inquiries. Mike couldn't ignore the clues any longer. His body was getting weaker. He said in 2020 that age was catching up with him. He remarked plainly that he couldn't possibly fix up all the cars he owned in the time he had left. He had seen what happened to folks who didn't plan ahead. Mike was getting close to the same age as his father, who had died at 60. He couldn't stop thinking about that. He had seen friends and other collectors die or grow sick, leaving their families with a lot of work to do. And he kept thinking about one thing. What would happen to his 500 automobiles if he just up and left? He said it out loud once, not to make things worse, but because it was true. What are my wife and kids going to do with all those cars in a field? It wasn't just a sad idea. It was a warning that would affect every choice he made from then on. Mike Hall glanced around his property in Tappan, British Columbia, in 2016 and thought he might finally be ready to slow down. He had more than 300 antique automobiles on 5 acres after years of collecting them, chasing rust, and piling up vintage wrecks. It was too much. He wanted to leave. Not just a little bit, but all the way. So he took a big risk. He sold everything in one big bundle. The land, the cars, the rust, the chaos, and the craziness. They wanted $1.19 million for it. Most people thought that was crazy. Who would want a field full with junk? The ad didn't get any serious offers. Everyone thought the same thing. It wasn't a set of cars. It was a junkyard. Mike did something entirely unexpected in 2017. Instead of giving up or decreasing the price, he made the price go up. He wanted $1.45 million. What occurred next astonished him too. The story blew up. A man is selling 5 acres of land and more than 300 antique autos. Everyone was talking about it. There were articles published about it, news stations picked it up, and the pictures of his land covered in cars went viral all over Canada. All of a sudden, Mike was more than just a local guy. He became a national interest. Some news sources even said that there might be closer to 500 automobiles. The property had become a story. People from all across the country started calling with little offers to buy individual cars. But the biggest shock occurred when the TV folks started to call. Tyson Hepburn, a Canadian producer who had worked on Highway Through Hell, was one of those people. He had met Mike earlier and remembered the crazy land. The internet is buzzing about this strange man with hundreds of broken cars and a yearning to leave it all behind. Now, the notion of a TV show doesn't seem so crazy anymore. Mike had something that no one else had, a genuine existence that looked like a story. Producers came up with concepts. Some people wanted a shocking story about trash and disorder. Mike did make one thing plain, though. He didn't want to appear on TV unless it was for a good reason. He stated the show has to be about making his ambition come true, not just making fun of his mistakes. What he actually wanted to do was fix up old automobiles with a small group of people and maybe make the craziness into something beautiful. Mike Hall didn't slow down or retire quietly when he turned 60. He opened the gates of his rusting kingdom and let everyone in instead. With help from Mayhem Entertainment and Cora Studios, he decided to film a show that would finally make him do something useful with the hundreds of cars he had spent decades collecting. He made an actual workshop on his acreage near Tappan, British Columbia. He called it Rust Brower's Restorations since it was surrounded by mountains of old cars that were falling apart. The show was based on a basic notion. He loved the automobiles he had, so he tried to transform them back into gold by fixing them, polishing them, and selling them. But everybody who knows Mike recognized that this wasn't just a plan for his business. He was fighting against time, against degradation, and against his own strong emotional ties to the cars he was attempting to get rid of. The show Rust Valley Restorers began filming in 2018. Mike called in his best friend Avery Schuff right away. Avery is a heavy equipment technician with a beard, large muscles, and even greater ideas. People called him the Muscle Car MacGyver. Mike also brought his son, Connor Charman Hall, with him. Connor was a quiet, sensible young man who constantly seemed to be cleaning up the financial messes his dad made. Cassidy McCone worked on the body, and Sarah Ward worked on the pieces. They were a mismatched group of car lovers, but they all had one thing in common. They thought it was worth it to save cars that everyone else had given up on. The show didn't appear or feel like a typical big-budget car show. This wasn't about spectacular graphics or big surprises. It was about genuine people in a tiny community working to make a dream come true. On December 6, 2018, Rust Valley Restorers made its debut on the Canadian History Channel, and people adored it. People loved Mike's crazy energy, large heart, and incredible optimism. He didn't look or act like a businessperson. He was a hippie who was over 6 feet tall and stated what he thought. He also spent money like it grew on trees. He revealed that this store almost killed him in one incident and then admitted that he had put almost $2 million into the business. He tried to backtrack a little by saying it was an investment in his mental hallucinations, but it was evident that he wasn't doing it for the money. Connor continually telling Mike that they needed to make money, but Mike always constructed the cars too perfectly, spent too much, and then didn't want to sell them. He would often give a discount on a car even if he didn't have to since he loved the buyer. Once, he declared he wanted to make people's dreams come true, even if it meant losing money. That happened a lot. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience for the handful who received a dream car at a great price. It was a problem for Rust Bros' bottom line. But the stats didn't matter to the watchers. What they saw was love. And Netflix paid attention. They bought the rights to webcast the performance around the world in 2019. Rust Valley became famous all of a sudden. People from all over the world who loved cars were coming to Tappan just to visit the famous junkyard and maybe meet the Rust Brothers crew. Mike often gave tours himself, and he still looked like a kid in a candy store. Mike's relationship with his son was one of the best parts of the episode. Connor really loved his dad, although he often had to act like an adult. Mike went with his feelings. Connor used reason. And somehow, their back and forth made magic happen. They fought over budgets and deadlines, but they were close. The show was about more than just vehicles in a lot of ways. It was about love, loyalty, and how dreams are passed down from one generation to the next. Avery Schoof provided a distinct kind of intensity. Avery was loud, hilarious, and full of advice, and he often attempted to get Mike to be smarter with his money. Avery even quit Rust Brothers at one point to open his own shop, Wild Man Restorations. Fans were stunned by that action, but there was no bad blood. Avery kept coming back to the show to aid Mike and even started a spin-off called Backroad Truckers in 2021 with Big Donnie Kleinfelder. The universe of Rust Valley just continued becoming bigger. Fans saw every peak and low during the course of 4 seasons from 2018 to 2021. They saw Mike save cars that were about to be lost forever. They saw budgets go through the roof, deadlines fall apart, and hopes almost fall apart. Mike once told a client that restoring a 1966 Lincoln Continental would cost $15,000, but he later found out that it would cost a lot more. He didn't walk away, though. Instead, he stayed on the job and ate the loss. He wasn't going to let anyone down. That was Mike Hall. Things were already getting tough for Mike Hall behind the scenes by the time Season 3 came out in 2020. It cost a lot to run Rust Brothers. There wasn't a lot of large business money behind it. Mike was mostly paying for things himself. Paying employees, buying parts, and running the store without producing a lot of money. He also said that he never really had a plan for his business and that his pals used to make fun of how lousy he was with money. But that wasn't humorous anymore. By the end of 2020, the costs were starting to get to him. He started to seriously consider about retiring again, which he had put off to keep the shop open for the event. But it wasn't only about money. Mike was getting older, and he was really worried about his health. He once joked, half-jokingly, that he could die tomorrow after years of climbing rocks and inhaling in paint fumes. He thought about what would happen to the cars if that happened. Then, out of nowhere, something happened that fans didn't expect. It was revealed in early 2021 that the area where the Rust Bros yard was located was really allocated for agricultural. It was part of British Columbia's agricultural land reserve, and Mike wasn't allowed to conduct a full-scale auto restoration business there. The local government had ignored it for years. But in January 2021, when Mike started building a new workshop, the Columbia Shoe Swap Regional District stepped in and told him he was going too far. He had to ask the Agricultural Land Commission for a specific exemption in order to remain doing business legally. The municipal board backed his application and praised how much the Rust Brothers store benefited the economy and tourism. But the commission officially turned it down in May 2023. On paper, Rust Brothers became an illegal business all of a sudden. At that point, Mike didn't even own the land anymore. Mike was now only a tenant because a new owner had taken over. They all rushed to find a solution. One option was to divide the land into smaller pieces so that the store could sit on its own smaller piece, which would be easier to rezone. Local leaders loved the concept and gave it the green light in early 2025, but the stress of the whole thing had already taken its toll. Then there were wildfires. British Columbia had a very bad summer in 2021. And Mike's yard full of vintage cars was like a match waiting to be lit. A tiny fire in the grass may ruin his whole collection. Mike had to make a tough choice because of that anxiety, the pressure from the law, and the stress of not having enough money. He was going to sell. Mike sold the Tappan property in the middle of 2021 without telling anyone. The sale didn't include the cars, though. That meant he had to move them. He prepared a huge auction with no minimum prices. The day was chosen to be October 2, 2021. There were going to be more than 500 cars for sale in one day, and many of them hadn't moved in years. It didn't seem real. Mike said, "In one day, 40 years of my life will be gone." A handful of the autos went for a few $100s. Some of them cost more than $10,000. But Mike didn't care about the money. He only wanted the cars to go to good families. He even told anyone who bought the automobiles to email him pictures if they ever got them working again. There were only 50 automobiles left once the auction ended. Mike maintained roughly 30 of his favorite cars, including muscle cars and a Dodge convertible. The rest were in different parts of Canada and the US. Mike had a hard time that day. He stated it was all a blur. Seeing the automobiles he had owned for 30 or 40 years drive away on trailers made him feel like he was about to cry. But there was also relief. The yard was finally clean. The zoning issue had calmed down. His family, especially his son Connor, was quietly happy that the huge burden was gone. At the time of the auction, Mike was 65 years old. He stated that seemed like the correct thing to do. In the spring of 2022, Rust Valley Restorers showed the whole affair as the Season 4 finale. Fans thought it was over. Mike had given up on his dream. The show seemed to be over. But something unexpected happened behind the scenes. Mike didn't walk away, he got sucked right back in. People started giving him more cars after the transaction. He made a joke that his collection started to expand again when he cleared the field. Without him even trying. He had around 200 cars again by 2023. He remarked, "They just find me." One call would be about an old Buick, another about a Pontiac, and then the cars would be back. It seemed like Season 4 was the end, but History Channel and Chorus Studios weren't done yet. In interviews, Mike revealed that they had recorded fresh episodes. He said they had 8 episodes filmed. With him, Avery, and his children in it. They shot them all year long in 2022, and they even took winter test drives with automobiles that shouldn't have been on snow. People who liked it adored it. So Season 5 finally came out in the fall of 2024, and it showed how the squad was getting used to life after the huge sale. They had a new layout, a smaller store, and fewer cars, but the same atmosphere. Mike worked on 2 cars that were very important to him, a 1968 Shelby GT350 Mustang and a 1941 Diamond T-Truck. One anecdote was about a fright that almost made them lose access to a vital lot they were using. Another hint at the ongoing land problems. But Mike kept going. He informed supporters on camera that restoring ancient cars was in his blood and that he would never give up. Mike began working as a brand ambassador for eBay Motors Canada off camera. He gave individuals advice about cars online and showed them how he looked for parts. People stated that even in Zoom interviews, he was still full of life and just as enthusiastic. He could finally breathe once he got rid of the huge collection. He could now enjoy the work again. Rust Brothers Restorations is still around, although it's smaller and smarter now. Mike chooses a few projects at a time and makes sure he does them well. He often goes to car exhibitions and fundraisers in British Columbia. He has become a sort of mentor to young mechanics by sharing what he learned the hard way. People have been motivated by his narrative to take chances, do what they love, and not worry so much about making money. Mike is now in his late 60s. Still lives in the shoe swap with his wife and pets. Connor is still with him, and their relationship seems stronger than ever. Mike's wife doesn't want to be in the spotlight, but you can bet she's delighted that the rusting automobiles are gone from the backyard. Mike has also become a sort of grandfather figure to the automotive community. People admire him because he made something because he loved it, not to make money. Rust Valley is no longer only a TV show. It's a part of history. And even if Mike never gets 500 automobiles again, he will always be the same person who can't say no to a rusted fender and a nice narrative.